Thank you, Michael. It's uh, it's one of my favorite songs from a long time ago and reminds me of times and places that I don't necessarily want to remember a lot. But hey, that's a whole nother story. So thank you for choosing to be with this spiritual community today. I feel a little bit like the captain of a plane who speaks to the passengers as the plane taxis up to the gate. Thank you for choosing to fly with us today. We know you had a choice in airlines, and we're delighted you chose to fly with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. I know there are a lot of places, a lot of centers and churches online, and a lot of different ways to celebrate spirituality and being together. And so I'm glad, tickled actually, that you chose to be with us today, because it's sweet to see so many familiar faces in the room. So I don't know about you, but for me, this week has been a little bit challenging. One part of my brain enjoys not being out in public, although it seems like I'm as busy as I've ever been with classes and morning practice and meetings online and all the other day-to-day stuff for myself and for the center. And another part of my brain is really, really missing those in-person interactions that used to happen all the time without any of us having to pay attention to them. I miss being able to go to the library. And I know that they're starting to make it possible to pick up books that you order online. It's still not the same as cruising the shelves. And Reverend Nita from Unity of Peace and I have finally arranged to have coffee together this week. We used to meet for lunch or breakfast once every couple months just to catch up on life. And I miss hugs in person, and I miss random, easy conversations. Michael and I were talking about that this morning before we all started with getting ready for service, because different love languages have different needs. And if your love language is physical touch, this is a really difficult span of time, because you have to have, or you feel like you have to have that physical contact that's just not possible unless you have a person or an animal of some sort in your space. And I'm not one of those, so it's not so bad. But still, I do miss in-person contact and the miscellaneous conversations that would happen with strangers or people I know that aren't so easy anymore. What changed for me this week was the realization that, at least for a while, this virtual world is likely to be the new normal, and the old normal isn't coming back exactly. You may have reached this awareness before I did, and so it's had a chance to settle for you. And I'm just kind of getting used to the idea. So congratulations if you're ahead of me in this. For me, it was a fresh idea and a little bit sad this week. And parts of this new normal are going to be totally awesome. And part of it's just going to be different. So today's talk is Powerful Arising. And the description that I wrote uses a quote from the Christian Bible from the Apostle Paul writing to the church at Corinth. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put the ways of childhood behind me. Part of me feels like in this learning about this new normal, I'm putting the ways of childhood behind me. I'm putting this simple, everything is exactly like I expect it to be. I'm putting those ways behind me. And part of that's a little sad, because it is a loss of a certain degree of comfortability. I was talking to my sister this morning on the phone. We always do. And she was telling me about her granddaughter, who earlier this week had been just very unhappy and distraught all day. And she wouldn't tell her mom what was bothering her. And finally, her mom cornered her basically and said, "You need to tell me what happened, what's wrong, because it's not good for you to be so upset." "I don't want to talk about it." was what all she would say. And finally, my niece said, okay, is it something you broke? No, I didn't break anything. Is it something you ate? And she sat there for a long time, and she finally said, yes, I ate toothpaste. And I read on the label that if you eat toothpaste, you have to go to the hospital. And I don't want to go to the hospital. So she was all upset because her childlike way of thinking meant if you ate toothpaste, then you had to go to the hospital. My childlike way of thinking means church is going to be like it always was. Sundays will be like they always were. And they're not. They're different. They're changing. And so I get to step into a new way of being. And so does everybody else. And if we want to pretend like it's going to be like it always was, we're going to be like my grandniece and kind of unsettled and unhappy and grumpy, because that's just not where we're living now. So we get to step into this adult way of being. And one of the many things that is in the process of changing is this idea of going back to being in person only on Sundays, and then having audio recordings for people to listen to later. A number of people have told me they really are thrilled we're online, even if it's weird, because they enjoy not having to come out and be with the community in person. And we have people from further and further away who can join in and participate, even though they don't live in easy driving distance from Tucson. So we're starting to have conversations about how we can live stream the Sunday services and do video recordings instead of just providing audio CDs. There's been a placeholder in the budget to purchase the equipment to do this for 4 or 5 years, but it's never been the most important thing. And as we've been in this period of physical distancing, it is moving up in importance. We're not there yet, but I can see that it's coming. And so when we do get back in person, we will begin to get serious about how to stay online as well. It won't happen right away. It's something that takes time and takes decisions and thought and people and training and equipment and all that other. And it's coming. So that's a movement from the way it's always been to this new way of being in the world. And yes, it's different. And yes, it's ultimately good. And yes, it'll be awkward and strange. And that's just what happens. So today, the talk is really about power, powerful arising, power becoming more powerful in our way of being. And many, if not most of us, have had an issue with power over the years because we've had experiences of people who have misused or abused their power. So from vocabulary.com, power comes from the Latin word potere, which means simply to be able. So according to the dictionary, power equals ability. Other meanings of power are the possession of qualities, especially mental qualities, required to do something or get something done. In physics, power is simply the ability to do work. It's also physical strength, or, and this is the way it's misused most often, power is controlling or directing by personality or positional authority. So the conversation today is about power over or power to. I read a bunch of books late last year and earlier this year by an author by the name of Kent Nerburn, who was asked by a Lakota elder named Dan to tell his story. The book's title was Neither Wolf Nor Dog, the first one, and I got it from the library. You can see why I like libraries. And since Nerburn had no native blood, this was quite an honor, because it's not normal for a native elder to ask a non-native person to explain their history and their belief system and their way of seeing the world. And so Nerburn was honored, and he was confused a lot because he didn't understand what he was looking at. He didn't understand the way people were communicating. He didn't understand what he was seeing or what it meant. And one of the many differences that Nerburn learned about was, and shared in his writing, was about shaking someone's hand. In Western tradition, the meaning of the handshake initially was to demonstrate that you were unarmed and entering into a conversation peaceably. The origin of the handshake, which was really a forearm grab, seems to have originated in ancient Greece about 5th century BC, as a way to make sure the person you were speaking with didn't have a knife strapped to his forearm. Later, the handshake morphed into somewhat of a discrete description of power, or power matching, or power sensitivity. And young people were often taught to shake hands appropriately and always solidly or powerfully. You didn't want to have a wimpy handshake when you shook hands with somebody, because they made up stories about who you were based on the strength of your handshake. But in the Lakota tradition, at least as Dan explained it to Nerburn, the handshake was never powerful or forceful in any way, because the handshake was never about control of another. And I have no idea whether this story can be generalized to all Lakota persons or all Native peoples, or if it was idiosyncratic to this particular elder. But that experience, that story in my mind of you're not shaking hands to demonstrate your personal power. You're shaking hands to connect. And so that's my first sort of foray into this idea of demonstrations of power over or demonstrations of power to. So we have all these stories about power over, and I really question our assumptions, because the first assumption, and we make this as children when we're young, is that the adults in our lives actually know more than we do. And so they're going to have all the necessary information or points of view on how other people should live or act or behave. And I'm not sure that that's ever true, but it is the place that we start when we're young. And I think the failing we have as adults is we still expect other people to be able to have the degree of information and awareness that they need to have in order to act in the most appropriate way. And I'm not sure that that's true. And so that's a point of view, a shift in point of view between the childlike frame of mind and the adult frame of mind. Because I know I don't have all the information I need, and I hope that I don't pretend to. Which is one of the reasons that I tend to ask questions and tell stories and post situations more than I tend to try to tell anybody anything. There's a quote attributed to Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching. I went looking for it in the multiple translations that I have, and I didn't find it anywhere. It doesn't mean that it's not there. I just couldn't find it. And it goes like this. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. So I want to circle back briefly to one of the topics I mentioned last week, the Stoic idea of what's in our complete control, what's not, but we have some control, but not complete control, and then things over which we have no control. In the writings of a South African psychotherapist by the name of Claire Newton, I was reminded of Stephen Covey's circle of no concern, things which have nothing at all to do with me. The circle of concern, things that I worry about but I can't really make a difference about. Circles of influence, things that I can potentially influence or maybe affect, but not control. And then Claire adds another circle inside of Covey's circles, things over which I have complete control. Her list of things which I have complete control looks an awful lot like the inner circle of the Stoics from last week. They are my thoughts, my words, my actions and behaviors, my reactions, my decisions, my choices, my attitude and my mindset, my mood and my work ethic. So at least in theory, we would all agree that these are things we have complete power over, complete control of, because they are all ours to decide or choose or live from. They all live inside our own mental models and our own personal viewpoints of our worlds. Then there are things on Claire's list over which we have some influence but not total control. Whether people like me or not, my children's future, where I work, how much my friends, family, or significant others like me or love me, my reputation, who follows me on social media, other people's thoughts, actions, choices, opinions. Even my productivity is not completely in my control unless I have defined it so clearly so that it doesn't require anyone else's participation for me to be productive. Of course, we can carefully define many of these situations to move them into what is actually within our own control. How I treat other people does have a determination in how they treat me. How I make decisions and whether I have to have that reflective other people agreeing with me or not in order to make my own decisions, and generally how I engage with the world. It still doesn't predict with 100% certainty that I will be responded to in the way that I want. This quote from Viktor Frankl you'll recognize. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I remember a couple years ago when I first put up my first blog posting on a WordPress site. Every couple weeks I would check back to see how many people had read my posts and how many comments there were. After a while I realized how silly that was and I quit looking because that child, I wanted to make sure that everybody had my words on their refrigerator. And it's like, no, they're words, they're your words, that's fine, but they're not necessarily of value to anybody else. So I had to readjust my point of view away from what other people thought of my writing as my primary motivator and shift to my own desire to write because I wanted to write, and publish because I wanted to publish, and I felt like I had something that might be useful to say. So in the same book, that Today's Spiritual Thought by Holmes and Bailes, further down the page, they wrote, life is a blackboard before which we stand and write the words that govern us. We hold both the chalk and the eraser in our hands. The blackboard allows us to use either chalk or eraser on it, according to our power of will or choice. If we have made scrawling incorrect marks on the blackboard, we need not condemn ourselves, nor do we need to go through life bemoaning their presence. We do not have to go through life paying for the mistakes of yesterday. The important thing is that hand holding the eraser, which is ours, must do the erasing. They continue, spirit can never be antagonistic towards us. It is always flowing through us into the kind of expression we allow it to have. The self-expression of God is a self-expression of humankind because the two are the same. Since I do look forward to the day when at least some of us will be in the same physical space with others of us, I was looking at potential ways of greeting one another when the potential concern of sharing a contagion may still be a consideration. There's the fist bump, of course, or the elbow bump, or the ankle bump, or maybe a hip check, or a wave from across the aisles. But I also looked up on the web some of the history around the Hindu tradition of the namaste. We all know it roughly translates as the divine in me greets or recognizes the divine in you. What I didn't know or completely appreciate was the namaste greeting was first used in the worship of deity or shared recognition of divine status between deities. So if you look at the statues, you will see the deities in the Hindu culture making that mudra with their hands towards each other. So there's a prescription in the ancient texts known as the agamas, where the worshiper of a deity must first become divine themselves, because worship is a transaction. And unless the worshiper is also divine, the transaction is invalid, because a transaction can only happen between equals, between individuals that share some details in common. So, implementing a namaste before or with an individual, we acknowledge that we recognize the divine spark in them. Further, by facilitating our partaking of these divine qualities, namaste makes us aware these very same characteristics live in us. So I like the idea of owning my own divinity and recognizing the divinity in you, because unless I can see it in me, I can't see it in you. And there's no condition of power over another in that. It's simple sameness, a recognition of unity. So while I was out walking yesterday, before it got too hot, I stopped to stare at the most amazing ocotillo plants that line the roadway. Leaves and flowers both at this time. Soon the leaves will fall off, but right now they're both there. And I noticed that the flowers were swarmed with little gnats or flies or something. And there were a couple of solitary bees working the blossoms. And the botanist in me wanted to know about the pollinators of these brilliant red blooms. As soon as I read they were pollinated primarily by hummingbirds, I remembered I knew that. And then also, I didn't know that they were sometimes pollinated by solitary bees. And all the little buzzing gnats and flies were trying to steal the nectar or the pollen. And the ocotillo was divinely oblivious to all of that. They were being the most perfect, strong, and powerful ocotillos that they were capable of being. So my question for you today becomes, recognizing your own divine nature and the power to accomplish that inhabits you already, which can never be limited by what other people do or don't do, think or don't think. Unless, of course, you decide they have power over you, but that's a different story. What you do, who you are, is only decided by you. So with that as the frame, what will you accomplish with your one wild and precious life? So I want to close with one little sort of almost Dr. Seuss-like poem by W. Bartley. For every ailment under the sun, there's a remedy, or there's none. If there be one, try to find it. If there be none, never mind it. And then a piece by Rumi that's familiar to all of us. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. So figure out what your ways are. Figure out how to own your divinity, how to show up as the power of you. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to move into the closing prayer, breathing in and out in this sacred space, in this holy moment. I know the one mind that lives as my mind and everyone's mind. And I celebrate this being. I celebrate this opportunity to remember and learn and grow and express and experience. And I celebrate this opportunity to remember that my hand holds the chalk and the eraser. And if I don't like what I've written, I can always just remove it and go again and repeat and repeat and repeat. And I celebrate the awareness that there's no big daddy God in the sky looking down and being grumpy at me for not paying attention. It's just me, recognizing that presence and power and poise and perfection that lives in me and as me, and as each of us, when we remember that, and showing up as each of us as we remember it. So I bless this wholeness. I bless this experience. I bless this opportunity to see and learn and grow. And I bless this gathering that has come together in this virtual time and space with this opportunity to be more than we have known ourselves to be. In this grand and glorious yes, I relax. I feel my muscles calm down. I feel my neck soften, my cheekbones soften, my breath get more deep and more even. And I relax into this day and I let it be. And so it is.
And so it is.